Okay, so let's start to build up this portfolio website from scratch. And when I say from scratch, I literally mean we have no markup in here and we have no styles in our main CSS style sheet. Now there's a couple of things we need to prepare before we get going. We are going to use Foundation's grid system just because it's so simple to get started with. We've already looked at the grid system in this series. So we are going to download Foundation 5, but of course we're only going to download the Essential pack. If you want to download the complete pack and play around with some of the button styles, if you want to add to this, then you can do that. But you can always replace that after you're done following this video if you're going to be following along. So make sure you download the Essential pack, and inside my text editor in the CSS folder, I've got my normalized style sheet and I've got my Foundation minified style sheet. So we can just start implementing that and start using it straight away. Now we've also got Google Fonts. We're going to be using Google Fonts to serve the fonts for our page. And that's because it's just, first of all, really easy to do, and Google Fonts do now have a really good collection of fonts. So we're going to use Google Fonts to serve our header font, that Pacifico font, and we're also going to use it to serve our body text as well, which is going to be Open Sans. And that's just this one here. So once you've downloaded Foundation and include it in your CSS file, you're also going to need your favicon, so make sure you've gone ahead and got that, the picture of yourself or just any test picture really, and the images that you're going to be adding into your grid just to show off your work. So whether they're just test images like I have, like we've looked at already, or they're actually pictures that have been reduced down to 300 by 200 roughly, it doesn't have to be exact, so you can implement them into the page as well. So let's get started with building this from scratch. So we're going to create our doc type here. We're going to be using HTML5 elements, so we want to use our HTML doc type. And then we're going to have our HTML tags here. And obviously we are going to indent. So the head of the page and the body of the page. Let's focus first on the head of the page so we can do everything we need to do here. We're going to set the character encoding on the page. Remember, that's really important from a security point of view, as well as being able to display different characters. So it's important for both. And let's go ahead and create a title. So this is going to be, could be absolutely anything, but I'm going to say my portfolio. So we now need to link in the relevant style sheets. So we've got our normalized style sheet, which remember, if we just cast our eyes back over it, resets certain things like the margin of the body, fixes different HTML5 elements, things like IE8 and IE9, and does various other things that will help this to work cross-browser. So let's link these in now. So we say link, the rel attribute is style sheet, and the href here is css/normalized.css. Okay, so let's do the same thing for our Foundation style sheet. So link rel is style sheet, and we're going to go into the CSS directory, and that's foundation.min.css. And last but not least is our custom style sheet. I've just called this main.css. Like I said, there's nothing in it at the moment. We will be writing quite a few lines in here. So I'm going to say link rel style sheet, and that is CSS main.css. Cool, so we've now got our style sheet sorted. Let's go and add our favicon now, just before we do anything else. In the browser at the moment, it just says my portfolio at the top, and if we pull up our element inspector, we can see we've got our basic document layout there. So we need to pull in our favicon, and we do that in the head as well. So we use the link attribute exactly like we would to pull in a style sheet, because technically we're pulling in some kind of resource. But this time the rel attribute is going to be icon. That's just telling the browser that this is the favicon for the website. So we say link rel is an icon. The type, now the type denotes what the type is here. So we need to give the MIME type for this resource. And the MIME type just identifies the type and the exact type, so image PNG. You might have come across these before. And again, we use the href attribute. It's exactly the same. It's a location to something. So all we do here is we say favicon.png. And then what that's going to do then is put that as our favicon. Perfect. And in the network tab, we can see that favicon should be being pulled through. I don't think it's showing for some reason. Yeah, it's not showing, but it will be pulled through as a request. Okay, so now that we've done that, we've done everything that we need to inside of the head of our document. Now what we're going to do is start working on the header. And this will involve creating a header with an ID, an H1 and a P paragraph element, which we're also going to give a class to, because they might change as elements. We want to identify them by class rather than by the element type, because if you use an H1 and then want to change it to, say, an H2 for some reason, or even another element, then you're pretty buggered if you have to do that. So let's create this let's create this header. So we create a header element. Remember, this is an HTML5 element. And down here, well, we'll give this an ID first, site header. So down here, we're going to have our H1, and we're going to here say my portfolio, or whatever you want to do. It could be your name. And then here we'll have a paragraph, and we'll say, this is my portfolio. I hope you like it. So at the moment, you can imagine this isn't going to look great. We've got the typography pulled in from Foundation, so it doesn't look too bad, but it's not looking like anything that we want to do. So we need to go ahead and sort this out. So we head over to Google Fonts, and we're going to choose, first of all, a header and a body font. So the body font's going to be Open Sans, so we can do a quick use on this. And I'm just going to pull in the normal 400, but you can obviously pull in others if you feel that you're going to use them. But I'm going to keep the impact on page load time as minimal as possible here. So we don't need any additional character sets. We just need this Latin, which is selected by default. And we're going to use the import method rather than the style sheet. So inside of our main.css, we paste that in there. And let's now create a body selector here. And let's change the font family to Open Sans. And we'll do a sans serif back up there. So we'll see that font on here change. Oops. Oh no. I think we need to do body HTML rather than just body. Oh, okay. So let's inspect why. The reason why this isn't working is because basically Foundation will have its own font. So if we scroll down, you can see here we've got paragraph, we've got an H1 here, we've got we should have a body font family. So that's been removed, because if we scroll up, it looks like H1 has a font family of Helvetica New, which is being sort of overtaken. I think this paragraph will have this Open Sans applied to it. So if we just scroll down, if we just find P, that's P. Font family inherit. If we go down, we should see font family Open Sans. That's what we did. And font family here. Okay, so let's change this back to body. And that should give us okay, it looks like this doesn't want to work. So let's just take a look at what might have gone wrong here. So font family Open Sans, sans serif, we're pulling that in, so that should work. Let's just untick this. Okay, so it is taking effect. It just looks like something there's not. Oh, that's why. The reason this has happened is because we have a paragraph element here, which is saying font family inherit from its parent element. But when I untick this, when I untick this down here, that's then inheriting not from the body. So technically, this style has been overridden because it has a strike through it. So it's a little bit confusing, but that's why that happened. But what we're now going to do is, because we don't want, we can leave the header style as Helvetica New that comes with Foundation if we want. But what we're going to do is we're going to specifically target headers and change them to the Pacifico font. So what we want to do now is we want to give classes to the elements within here so we can target them. So in here, I'm going to say site header, or we can call it page title maybe, or site title. And then in here, we can say site description, like so. So inside of main, let's create a comment up here just so we can specifically say these stars are for the site header. And for the site header, we want to target the actual site header first of all. And we want to set the background color. So the background color in this case is going to be one of our, from our color palette. And I'm choosing this one here. So it's this color here. So we take this, we paste it in there, and there we go. So we've now got that. Still doesn't look quite right, but we'll fix this up. So what we now want to do is we want to text align center. So that's going to take all of the text and it's going to align it to the middle of that element, which is really useful. And then we're going to set some padding on this, so 40 pixels. So there we go. So it's already looking a little bit nicer than what we've already seen. And we're also, by the way, at this stage going to give it a margin bottom of 40 pixels because now anything we add under this site header is going to be touching really close to it and we don't want that. So we're now going to specifically target the site title. So we say site header, site title, and we want to change the font family of this. Now you could, if you wanted to, change the font family for all headers to have Pacifico consistently used for H1, H2, H3, all the way down to H6. Now we haven't actually loaded Pacifico in yet, so let's go ahead and do that inside of Google Fonts. So let's go back. And here we go, there's Pacifico. So we're going to do a quick use. You can see it doesn't have too many options, it just has a normal option here. So we go ahead and just import that as we normally would. So let's paste this in here. And there we go. So font family for the site title is Pacifico. There we go. Cool, looks good. Obviously the color needs changing, but I'm also going to add a margin bottom on the site title of 20 pixels. You'll notice that I'm going to be going up in 20 pixel increments. I'm never going to have 10, I'm never going to have 30. I'm going to start with 20, and any sizing is going to be 20, 40, 60, 80, and so on. It just helps to keep consistency. But mainly I'm going to be using a 20 pixel and a 40 pixel. So what we now want to do is change the color of the site title and the description. Now you notice if I do site title color, just testing, do white, you'll notice that that doesn't override the style associated with the header. So what I'm going to do is down here, I'm going to say site header, site title, and then I'm going to do another selector for site header, site description, and then I'm going to say font, color, and in our color palette I'm going to choose this color here. So that's that second one. We just copy that, paste that in there, and let's add our hash in, and let's also change these to lowercase characters as well. We don't want them as capitals. So now we have this result. Cool, so we've got a nice color on there. Works really well because we've chosen a specific color palette. Not all color palettes are going to work well together, and it's up to you to really judge which colors go together, like this nice beige type color on this dark background. But you can judge that and just play around with it in terms of the design. So at the moment we've got a little bit of extra spacing underneath the paragraph here for the description, and we don't want that because we want to keep 40 pixel consistency between each of these elements. They're very small things that really make a website look much better, so you have to try and control these things and make sure everything's nice and even. So we're going to say page description has a margin bottom of 0. And then now you'll see that that looks a little bit more consistent. Why isn't that? Oh, sorry, site description. So now, there you go. It looks a little bit more consistent now with the same amount of spacing between this and this, roughly. Okay, so we finished the header. The header's done. Now, how does the header work responsively? We've not used any grids in here at the moment, but it does come down quite nicely. And you'll notice that Foundation, actually, if we get rid of this, Foundation reduces the size of the header when you get down to a smaller size. So that's done automatically for us within the Foundation framework. Okay, so now what we want to do is work on the gallery. So we've got our images, we're all set up in terms of that. Let's create a little comment here for the gallery. and we won't write any styles yet. What we'll do is under here we'll write out our rows and our columns and everything we need, and then we'll go back and we'll retrospectively add styles in to specifically style the elements within it. So we are going to create a div here with a class of gallery. That's just going to wrap that gallery. You could do this as an ID, but you might have more than one gallery on a page, so you might want to do this as a class instead. And then in here we're going to have a row. So this is now using Foundation's grid system, so row. And then in here we're going to have a large 4 column. So this is going to be used 3 times to make 3 in a row. So we'll say 1, 2, and 3. Let's just look at how that's working. Cool. Okay, so these are where our images are going to go. It looks a little to the left, but that's just because it's text automatically aligned to the left. So let's start to just put these images in really and just see what this looks like. So we're going to say image source. We're also going to add our alt attribute, and I'm just going to say work 1. This can be something descriptive about what the particular thing is. So for example, if it is a photograph of, say, I don't know, your family, you'd write a photograph of my family. It's just to give a visual description of the image, a description of the visual image rather. So our image is inside of our image directory just here. So image, img, and then we've got work, so work, and then we've got 1.png. Easy as that, like so. So now that we've got in there, let's take a look. Cool, it looks okay. Now, the problem with these is if these images are larger than 300 pixels in size, naturally, they're going to increase their width to the point where they're going to overlap onto another grid. So I've not done this just because we're loading in an image size that we actually need rather than one that's larger. But if you do happen to be loading in a larger image, this won't look very good. So what we need to do for the gallery, we need to say gallery image. And let's just pull this down a little bit. We need to say gallery image, and we're going to say width 100%. Now you might be thinking, well, width of 100%, how's that going to help things? Well, it's going to help because what it will do is, however big this grid gets, it's going to stretch to 100%. You see it just moved a little bit there. Let's get rid of this and actually move our grid in just so we can see the responsive nature of it. Okay, so you can see here that now we've actually got this grid going 100%. So we've now got a 12 basically. It's filling up the entire width of the container, but the image size isn't changing. So this is another responsive design issue. If we change the width of the image to 100%, when we get down to a size like that, the image automatically responds to whatever viewport. We're going to be fixing this in a bit because obviously your images are going to get a little bit blurry and they're not going to look as good if they are like that. So we're going to change the grid structure in the medium viewport size. So we've now got image of work 1. Let's do the same for 2 and 3, and we may as well do the same for 3 and 4, 4 and 5 and 6. So 1, 2, this is number 3. And then we can just literally take this row and we can copy it down here. So we're just having one row underneath each other. That's absolutely fine. So this is going to be 3. This is going to be 4. So work 4. This is going to be 5. Work 5. And this is going to be 6. And work 6. So we've now got the following. So everything looks okay, except we've got a little bit of spacing issue here. And also we've got the same problem where this is just way out of control. We need to control that at particularly this size. So let's address the issue of the spacing first of all. So we're going to have a margin bottom on our images of 40 pixels. Now, why are we actually adding the margin bottom on the images 40 pixel? The reason being is that when we come inwards, then we've got an equal gap between each image regardless of how the grid collapses. So if we were to add the margin on the columns, for example, that wouldn't work as well. Okay, so what we're going to do now is tackle the responsive side of this, because when we get down to medium, these are too big, so we still want them to remain the same. So we're going to say for each one of these, medium 4, just to keep it the same, and let's copy and paste this just to save a little bit of time. So we want on a medium viewport this to be 4 columns as well. We've already seen this before, so it's nothing really new. And there we go. So that's fixed that problem. Now when we come down to small, that's at an acceptable level that I don't mind devices like that seeing that image like that. It shouldn't decrease the quality too much. If you really need to have these really looking good at this size particularly, maybe on a larger phone or something like that, or a smaller tablet, then you can just fiddle around with it as you need. Now what we're going to do is we're going to focus on that opacity change. Remember when we looked at the demo of this, we hovered over and the opacity went from maybe, 50% or 60% to 100%. So this is really simple. We haven't looked at this CSS property yet, but it's opacity. And this will just change the opacity of the majority of elements that we have available. And we do this from a scale of 0 to 1. So in my case, it's going to be 0.6. You can, of course, just do 0.6 like that if you don't want to use the 0. But I always find it's more readable when you add a 0 in there. So now we have an opacity of 0.6 on all of these elements. So you can probably guess how we would tackle this on a hover. We use the hover pseudo element. So we're going to say gallery, image, hover. And then we're going to say opacity 1. There we go. So when we hover over this now, the opacity goes to 1. So that's all well and good, but we want it to look a little less harsh. At the moment, it sort of is a little harsh. So we're going to add a transition. So let's add our WebKit transition here, and we'll WebKit transition on the opacity, and we'll do this for 200 milliseconds, and we'll ease that in. Okay, so now let's do the same thing, but without the vendor prefix, and you can go ahead over to Can I Use and check which vendor prefixes you need and make that decision for yourself. In this case, I'm using the WebKit one. So now you can see that's a little nicer. It just sort of fades in and it's not too harsh. Just feels a little nicer. And there we go. So that's our hover effect on our actual gallery. So what we now want to do is we want to actually add a little title above this, and we're going to add it in here. So within the gallery element, but not within the row, obviously. And this is just going to be an H3 element. Oops. It's going to be an H3. And this is just going to say my work. Now at the moment, this is not going to look great. Like so, it just doesn't look nice. So we're going to create a generic class that deals with headers, or this particular header. So what we want to do is we want to add a comment. Maybe we could do it a little bit up here. So we're going to say page heading, and we'll give this a class of page heading. It's just a general page heading that we add down the page. Because we're only creating one page here, that's fine. You might have different section headings, whatever. So the text align this time is going to be center. So we're centering that text. Let's take a look at that. Oops, we haven't added the class. So let's add the class to this. Site heading, or page heading rather. There we go. So we've centered that. It's already looking better. And we want to additionally change the font family here, and we're going to have Pacifico again, like so. And then we're going to have a margin bottom of 40 pixels. Remember, we're keeping it to 20 increments. And let's give that a refresh. Cool, so it's already looking better. And let's go ahead and add a color here. So I'm going to choose this brown color, this first one here. So I can copy that and just say color hash and that. And again, let's change these A's to lowercase. There we go. So we've now got my portfolio, my work, and we've got our nice hover effects on our actual work. Cool. So now let's go on to the About Me section. So we're going to create a little comment here to say About section. Can be anything. And we already know what class we're going to give this. We're going to give it a class of About, just to identify that area. Again, because it's probably not going to be duplicated, you can give this a class of, or an ID if you wanted to. So here we say div class of About. And in here, what do we need? Well, let's first look at the actual About text. So the text that we have centered down here. So we're going to use an offset for this. So we're going to create a row like that. And in here we're going to have a column. But we want this to essentially be centered. We don't want this to fill up the entire width of the page because it's too much. It's too stretched out for some text. Text should be sort of more compact. It's easier to read if you don't have as many characters on one line. So for the class, we know that it's going to be a column, so we can say columns. But this is going to be a large 8. So in here, let's just create a paragraph and let's put some lorem ipsum in there. And let's take a look at what this looks like. Okay, so the size of this is fine, but when we do a large A, of course, it's just going to be on the very left-hand side. You can see that perfectly lines up with down here as well, which is really nice. But I want this to be central. So what we can actually do here is we can offset it. So we can say large offset by 2. So we're offsetting it by 2 lots of the grid. And that's important because we've got 2 here. We've got 2 here now because we've offset it by 2. And we've got an 8 in the middle, which basically means that we then have 8 add 2 is 10, add 2 is 12. So it still adds up to 12. So we've centered this container now by offsetting it. And you can see the offset is represented by that orange portion on the left-hand side. So there we go. So we've now done that, really, really straightforward, and that's going to still respond really nicely as well. If we just pull this inwards, you can see that the text will end up sort of sitting against that, and it will just respond in nicely. That's fine. You could even center this text if you really wanted to. So you could say something like about text align center, and that will actually help with the image as well later. But obviously by doing this, what you're doing is you're attaching this style too far up the chain of elements. So if you did want to put something inside of that about section which wasn't centered, then you're a little bit stuck. So you're going to have to remove this and then add it to the specific elements you want. So I'm not going to add that in for now just because it's probably bad practice to do so, but you can do if you really want to. So what we can do now is focus on the about image. So we know that we have the image in there, so let's create our markup for this now. In fact, actually, let's first of all add our page heading, because we know that we've already got this style together. So we can say h3, about me, and then inside of here, we can say class page heading. And that should look exactly like it does above, nice and consistent there, and looks really good. So now we'll add this image in. So underneath this, let's create a div here with a class of about-image, and we'll end that there. Okay, so now inside of here then, let's add our image in, like so, and let's obviously add our alt in, so I'll just say me. This might be better to be more descriptive, like a picture of me, so I'll add that now, a picture of me. And for the source, we know that's img/me.png, and this is just going to look normal. It's sat across the left of the page, which we'd expect because we've not centered anything, and it's really close to this text as well. So there's a couple of things we need to sort out here. And we're also going to give it a nice shadow just to make it sort of pop but still look very flat, because we're not using very many sort of gradients on this page. Everything's very solid and flat. So for the about image, we know that we can target this image element within it, and we're also going to add that spin effect on it as well. So what we need to do is we need to, rather than target the actual about section, we're going to say about image, and inside of here, let's do a text align center. Now you might be thinking, well, this is text align. How the hell is it going to affect an image? Well, it actually does, and we use text align to align images as well. So that's just a little tip there that you might want to use. So now that we've got this, let's increase the margin on the bottom, and again, we'll keep this consistent with what we've already done. So we're going to keep this consistent in terms of saying, well, I want 40 pixels on the bottom margin, because remember we've got 40 pixels on between this header and the image, and then the image and the text, so it all looks very even. You can just see how if I was to reduce this to say 30 pixels, that it just looks a little bit out of place. The text looks a bit too close. It's entirely up to you, but consistency really is key when you're doing this. So now we want to add our border radius, but we're not going to target that. We're going to target about image. So let's add our border radius of 50%, which is going to round that out to the point that it adds or creates a circle. We know the natural width of this, so I'm going to say width 150 and and height 150 as well. It's just so the browser doesn't have to calculate that. And let's add a box shadow onto this. So I'm going to do a 3 pixel left or X and Y or left and right, left and top axis. And then I'm going to say 0 for the spread, and I'm going to say EEE for the color. Let's just change that to black for now, and we'll change it back to EEE in a moment. I'll show you what I mean. So we've got this sort of like button almost effect. So it's just popping out like that, like a little cylinder. So we'll add EEE to that, and the effect then becomes very subtle, but it still sort of pops out a little bit nicer. Okay, so now we want the hover effect where it rotates. So we're going to look at CSS transformations here. We've already looked at things like filters, but now we're going to look at transformations. So I'm going to say about image hover. So when we hover over the image itself, what do we want to do? Well, we want to do a transform. So we use the transform property, and then we choose what we want to do. Now, rotate's quite a cool one. You can specify it in degrees. So we basically want to transform this element. We want to rotate it 20 degrees. And there's additional properties you can use here, or values you can use here. For example, you can scale something up. So I can scale it by maybe 2. You'll see that just scales that upwards. That's quite nice. And you can use any of these effects really. I mean, you could even do two effects. In fact, let's do that because I think that's going to look quite cool. So let's do 1.1. I think that should be just about enough. Yeah. So we'll do a 1.1 scale on this, and you'll notice that makes it really easy to keep the central point of the image while you increase it. If you were to do something like on hover, set the width maybe to 160 pixels, and then set the height to 160 pixels, you'll find that you get this sort of, the point, what do you call it? The center point, I can't remember what it's called, but it will push everything down the page. It won't look very nice. But with this transform scale, that works the same. So we're also going to then rotate it 20 degrees, like so. Oh, sorry. What I've done now is I've basically overridden this property by declaring it again. Because the style sheets, as we know, cascade down, that's done that. So all I do is I take this, and instead I put it on here like that. So when I refresh now, we get both effects. So it comes out and it rotates. So now what we want to do is we want to add our vendor prefix version. We don't need to do this, as you can see, but I'm going to add it anyway. So WebKit transform scale rotate. Cool. So that's still going to work exactly the same. And now what we want to do is on the actual image itself, we want to add the transition. Remember, the transition that we add is added on the original element. So we say transition, and we want to do the transition on the transform element. So however this element is transformed, we want to animate this. So 500 milliseconds and ease. Let's just check this out. I'm not sure if we do need a vendor prefix. No, we don't. So you can see now that when I hover over it, we get this really cool popping out type effect. So let's just add the vendor prefix here anyway, just so we know that that's in there. We don't have to. And there we go. And we could add it for transform as well, but that would get a little bit confusing. So we've now created the majority of our portfolio. We've just got the footer to go now. We've done the header, we've done all the work with a little bit of animation there, and we've also got this cool effect here like this. Really like that. So let's go on to look at our footer, and we're going to look at something a little bit more technical now. We're going to create a generic helper for our page that allows us to add unordered lists, which we've already seen, and we are going to style them up in a different way so they sit in line. You might be thinking, well, why would we do this? We could just have two anchors next to each other. And the reason that we do this is because an unordered list to someone who can't visually see the page, whether that be someone using a screen reader or an indexer for a search engine, still sees this as a list of things. So it's still really, really useful. So inside of our page, let's do a footer. So let's use a HTML5 footer element. And inside of here, let's set the, well, what can we do? Let's create the unordered list first of all. So we'll create the unordered list, create the list items, and inside of here, let's add, say, my email address, alex@codecourse.com. And let's duplicate this down, and then let's add an anchor in here. And let's say Twitter. And we'll just put a hash in there for now. We're not going to link it to anywhere. Okay, so we've now got this. Doesn't look great. All we want is for this to be centered, and we want these to be next to each other. We don't want these bullet points because we want to maintain that it's a list, but we don't want it to look like a traditional list. And let's add an ID to the footer, by the way, site footer, just so we can style this. So in the main.css file down here, let's say site footer. And let's target that. And let's give it just the sort of normal padding of 40 pixels like we did for the header. And let's also do a text align here. And let's align the text center. So there we go. So now this looks even stranger because, I mean, these are on separate lines. So we'd expect that from an unordered list. But we've still got these bullet points here and it's not quite looking what we need. Now what we could do is we could say, well, I want to target the site footer unordered list, and I want to set the list style type to none, which will basically remove these list images, if you like, or list types. But we don't want to do that because it's the chances that somewhere else on the website, either on this page or another page, that we want to have an inline unordered list is quite high. The chances are high. So we're going to go up to the top and we're going to declare this just at the top. You don't have to do it at the top. But this is the inline list. And we're going to do this as a generic thing. So we can add our class to it and get an inline unordered list. So we'll give this a class, so we'll call it inline. So any unordered list with a class of inline, we want to then apply the styles that we're about to write. So we're going to say ul.inline, so an unordered list with a type of inline. What do we want to do? Well, we want to set the list style type to none. And by the way, here you can actually change the list style type to other things as well. So I think bullet's one of them, maybe. Yeah, bullets, maybe that is one. You can just do whatever you want here. Circle is another one that I know. And that's just a little circle. So you can actually change them, but in this case we just want none. We don't want any to display at all. And we also have, quite annoyingly on an unordered list, we have this default padding. You can see that on the left and the bottom there, that orange. A margin. So we're going to remove the margin. And I think this is just Foundation adds this in, but we're going to say margin 0, 0, 0, 0, but we're going to keep 20 pixels on the bottom just in case we need to use this element anywhere else. And that just means that then any content underneath it isn't sat directly up on it. So now what we need to do is tackle the problem of the fact that, I mean, you could leave it like this, but we want this to be next to this with a little gap in the middle. So what we're going to do is we're then going to target UL inline, but then the list items within it. So we don't have to touch the anchors or anything like that because we might not always have anchors in there. But for this, we want to say display inline block. You know what an inline block is. We've already covered it. Basically, now we can style this how we would a block element, but it will sit in line. So at the moment, it looks like that. Perfect. So we've now got these list items next to each other. No sign of them bullet points ruining it. But now these are a little bit too close together. So all we need to do is we need to say margin. Now we could say margin left or margin right. So you could say margin right 10 pixels, for example. And that would achieve the effect you're after because you're setting the margin there. But what's going to happen is, particularly as this gets smaller, you'll notice that it's a little bit off. Let me just do a little extreme example here of 30 pixels. You'll notice that it will be, well, it doesn't look off here, but it will look off on smaller devices, particularly. I think on my phone I tried this and it looked very small. So what we want to do is we want to give an even amount of margin. So we're going to say margin 0 and 10 pixels, or 0 and 5 pixels, which will put a 10 pixel gap in between these, you can see. Well, a little bit more than 10 because by default they're not collapsed against each other. So I think that looks okay. You can increase it if you want to. But there's our footer. we've created our footer. Understandably, there isn't much to the footer. We don't have a background to the footer or anything like that. But we've marked it up, so if we do need to give a background to it, we can, and it will look nice. So for example, if I wanted to come down and add a background color of, and then choose from my color palette. So for example, maybe I wanted this sort of minty green. Probably wouldn't want to add this in here. But if I did want to do that, just put that as a small a, then everything's set up ready for me to do that, for me to go. So just finally, what I'm going to do is just to tidy things up and get rid of the default anchor color, we're just going to style the anchors on the page, and we're going to do that according to our color palette. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose, let's say we could choose this, I guess. Choose this for our link color, that'd be quite nice. So on our main.css, we go right up to the top and we say A and A link. We want these to be a color of that. So, and go ahead and add in the visited color as well. So maybe make that a little bit darker if you want. What you could, of course, do is you could take this and you could maybe look for an RGB, a hex to RGB converter. Let's just go on to this one. So you could, of course, paste this in here, convert to RGB, and you could do something like color for this is RGB. No, we'll keep that in there, and then we'll say color is RGBA, and then we'll enter them values. So it's 991651163, 99165. What was it again? 53, and then we could do 0.1. Oh no, sorry, we could do 1. And now what we can actually do is when we maybe hover over a link, so we could say a hover, we could use the same thing. And bear in mind, the reason that we've done this color here is because older browsers that can't support this will ignore this rule and only set this one. So here we could do maybe 0.5. So that means that when the user hovers over, that link turns a little bit of a weird color. And then you could set your A visited color as well. I'll leave you to do that and choose the color that you want. You could, of course, just choose a darker color than this or something like that. So there's a couple of things that you can do there. So let's just check how well this works responsively. We know that it should work okay. The header is reduced by Foundation automatically. The My Work, we've already dealt with the grid system, and this looks fine. Obviously on a device with only a touch screen, a user's not going to be able to hover, but if they click on this, they should get this effect come out. And we've got our little unordered list down there as well, and everything looks okay. We've got our text here as well. So that's our little portfolio site that we've built. We've looked at quite a few things in here, including obviously getting the images in and little bits, tips for the image. We've started up using a couple of fonts as well, and we've tried to make this page look as nice as possible. So you can go ahead and use this in your own project once you start building things up, or if you have anything else to show off, you can try and recreate this and get that online. So that's how we build a portfolio, looking at pretty much a lot of what we've looked at throughout this series.